So we also grade acquisitions.
Yeah.
David and I will each give it a grade, and our guests can opt to either grade or not, especially since you were part of it.
I'm happy to grade.
Yeah. All right. Welcome back to episode 42 of Acquired, the podcast about technology acquisitions and IPOs. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. Today we are covering the 2007 acquisition of Opsware by HP. We have with us a fantastic guest, Michel Feaster. So David will give Michel's full bio in a minute, but I want to say I'm personally very, very excited to have Michel with us. A lot of people know the story of the deal from the Opsware side, as told in Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. So Michel was the director of products for the division that purchased Opsware, and is going to share the story from the HP side of that acquisition today. So David, can you tell us a little bit about Michel's background?
Yeah, so Michel today is the co-founder and CEO of Usermind, which is a unified customer engagement hub based in Seattle and that she founded in 2013. But as Ben was alluding to, a decade ago, before Usermind, Michel was working at the opposite end of the tech spectrum from a startup. She was the director of product for a division of Hewlett-Packard's enterprise software business, where she led the acquisition of Ben Horowitz and Marc Andreessen's legendary company Opsware for $1.6 billion. And most fun, flash forward to today, and the tables have turned. Ben Horowitz is now on her board at Usermind on behalf of Andreessen Horowitz, his venture capital firm. And we are honored to have Michel on the show to cover this deal. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really excited.
Yeah, we appreciate it. So before we dive in, we want to mention to new listeners of the show, we've got a Slack, and we are over 800 strong. That is at acquired.fm. On the sidebar, you can join us in the Slack and talk all things M&A, tech news, and anytime there's something pretty exciting that happens, like the Whole Food acquisitions, that's when it really shines, and there's lots of great speculation in there. Second is we love reviews. So you can help us grow the show by leaving a review on iTunes, on Apple Podcasts. That's what we call it now. And tell your friends.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep, it's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do, operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like tabular review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
David, do you want to take us through the acquisition history and facts?
Yeah, as always. So as Ben alluded to, we're going to try and focus mostly on the HP side of the story with Michel, because much ink has been spilled about the Opsware side. And if you haven't heard about Opsware, we totally recommend reading The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben. It is such a great book. And there's also a really great sort of period piece that Wired did in August 2000, right before the tech bubble burst, all about the company and about Ben and Marc Andreessen, and this being Marc's sort of second act after Netscape. So we'll link to that in the show notes. And that provides a really good full history of Opsware. But to sort of set the stage, I'm gonna take sort of 5 minutes and do a quick truncated history, just so we're all on the same page and can then dive in with Michel about how HP viewed things. So the company that ultimately became Opsware was founded as a different company called Loudcloud, and it was started in September 1999 by 4 people. Marc Andreessen, who had been the co-founder and CTO of Netscape and was famously the internet's golden boy on the cover of Time magazine, among many other press outlets, and Ben Horowitz, who was the CEO of Loudcloud. And Ben had been a PM for Marc at Netscape, and 2 other folks, Tim Howes. Howes was the CTO of Netscape's server division, and he was a total expert in sort of internet infrastructure and plumbing. He created LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which if you use any sort of internal company directory service or logon service these days, it's probably based on that. Pretty amazing. And then the 4th person was a guy named Sick Ree, and Sick, I believe, had briefly been part of Netscape. But when Netscape got acquired by AOL, he was CTO of the e-commerce platform division within AOL. So that was the division, and this becomes important for Loudcloud, that when companies back in the day did deals with AOL to be part of the sort of walled garden and sell things via e-commerce through AOL, they needed to spin up sort of microsites to do that quickly. And Ree was kind of in charge of helping Nike or whatnot do that at AOL. And so the idea for what Loudcloud would be, it actually comes from Ree. And the idea was basically that it would be AWS. Before AWS, it was going to be an infrastructure as a service product. And the idea was that just like these companies who didn't have software developers or internet infrastructure teams, like Nike or LL Bean or whomever, needed to spin up websites to sell on AOL, they would also need to do that on the broader internet. And why would they go build their own teams to do this? They should just use a service to do the infrastructure for them.
And that was both, David, that was the human power as a service as well as the actual servers as a service, right?
Well, I think it was mostly the servers as a service. Because remember, the idea of the cloud doesn't really exist in these days. If you wanted to build a website, the first thing you had to do was go buy a bunch of servers and stick them in a closet somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's what Loudcloud was sort of designed to be, your virtual servers.
But by the way, that is why they partnered with EDS. So later there's a big transaction they did with those guys, and that was for the managed service offering. So Opsware sold the AWS element, and they partner with EDS to provide a full managed service. And that'll be a chapter in the later element of their story.
To come. But there's this great Marc Andreessen quote from the first press briefing that they do about the company there's so much buzz around this company before they even launch, because these are obviously sort of early, the first generation of tech celebrities, and this is their second act. And the quote from Marc is that it's like providing the electric power grid and companies can plug in. And I just thought this was so awesome, because we'll also link in the show notes when Jeff Bezos launches AWS. later in the mid 2000s, he goes and he talks at Y Combinator, and he uses this exact analogy for AWS. So he's literally, I didn't realize this. I don't know if Jeff realized this, if he came up with it independently or not, but he is literally using the same analogy that Andreessen used when he was launching Loudcloud.
Wow. And so, Michel, I mean, we'll get into this in tech themes, but clearly AWS, huge successful business right now. Loudcloud, not a huge successful business then. Why, obviously timing is the issue, but what was it about the timing?
Well, I mean, I think, look at the readiness of the internet for enterprise cloud adoption. I mean, the reason to me Bezos is so successful today is one, development is so much more pervasive. So the number of people who could leverage AWS has exploded. Number two, the cost of starting a company has gone to zero. So the number of targets who would be, leveraging something like AWS is so much greater now. And three, I think security, privacy have evolved enough that companies are actually willing to build. So the number of kind of target enterprises, your deal size, all of these elements around kind of go to market have finally matured to where AWS is not an idea, it's a business.
Mm-hmm. And there's another really big piece of this, which is that the whole concept of virtualization, server virtualization, didn't really exist yet. Like, it sort of existed. The company VMware, which listeners may or may not be familiar with, but is one of the largest enterprise software and infrastructure companies in the world. It's majority owned by EMC these days. What they do, they had created a product that was just starting to take off around this time, but wasn't widely used, that essentially let you take physical server machines and slice them up into multiple virtual machines. So one box could serve multiple customers, essentially. And that was a big key for making something like AWS work, because without that, you needed, essentially a separate box for everybody. And that was not yet a paradigm that existed in these days.
Yeah, it feels like that would hamstring Amazon these days. I don't know.
Well, now we're on to containers, right? That whole technology's emerged. By the way, on our side, when we were doing the deal, virtualization is a key reason why HP needed to buy Opsware. So it's not really just about, do you need virtualization to be able to run an effective, AWS offering? It's what problem does that create in IT? And so one of the central reasons to me for Opsware's growth is that as virtualization exploded in the IT infrastructure, the old human way of managing servers and networks and storage couldn't scale. And so, one of the single biggest reasons for their success was the exponential growth and complexity that virtualization drove in IT. So if you look at, Opsware's, as it went from Loudcloud later to become Opsware, its growth from, 10 million to, 80 or 100 million at its exit, virtualization was the technology that drove the majority of their market opportunity, and was a big factor in our belief that we needed to be and own the technology, right? That this was a key control point in the future of how IT was going to work.
Yeah, and we'll come right back to that. But in the meantime, this isn't really what Loudcloud is trying to do. They're trying to be AWS, and there's so much hype, and we'll just run through really quickly sort of the corporate timeline. And fortunately, Ben Horowitz himself made a nice little truncated version in a blog post that we'll also link to in the show notes. But this is 90s bubble era internet at its finest. So November 99, before launching the product, Loudcloud raises $21 million at a $45 million pre-money valuation. And Andy Ratcliffe at Benchmark led that round. January 2000, so just a couple months later, they raised another $45 million in debt from Morgan Stanley, of all places. They haven't even launched a product yet. A few months after that, June of 2000, they raised $120 million at a $700 million pre-money valuation. And then things start to go a little rocky. But nonetheless, the company sort of perseveres. They do end up going public in March of 2001. They list on the NASDAQ. They raise another $160 million, but the valuation goes down from the last private round. Echoes of this happening again today. So they have about a $480 million market cap. And then the whole world just blows up, the tech world, and all of the customers for Loudcloud were these, pets.com era startups, and they just go out of business. And so there's essentially no business left for Loudcloud, for the AWS managed service product. So in August of 2002, as Michel was alluding to, they sell that business to EDS, which is Ross Perot's software company.
And what does EDS stand for? Is it Electronic Data Service?
Systems. I think it's Electronic Data Systems.
Mm-hmm.
They sell that for just over $60 million. But that's the whole business. Like, there is no other business within the company. And Ben writes about this at length in the book. But what they do have is this technology, this sort of internal tool that they'd created called Opsware. And Tim Howes, the guy who invented LDAP previously at Netscape, he had created this tool within Loudcloud that was basically an automated way to provision and then deploy and manage all the servers that they had in their data centers. And they sort of have this idea that, like, okay, Loudcloud isn't working at all. Let's get rid of it. We have this tool. We use it. We think it's great. Maybe other customers who have big data centers would want to use this. So they essentially completely pivot as a public company after the tech bubble bursts, and they start down this journey to build an enterprise software company selling data center technology.
Michelle's shaking her head over there.
Yeah.
What's going through your head right now?
Well, I mean, that's an almost impossible task. I was hearing it read about, I obviously got to know Ben much later in his life, but, it's hard enough to build. So think about how hard it is to build shrink wrap software that you're going to sell and install at a customer when you're going to do it. And this is before SaaS, right? So his stuff was all on-prem, and they had to take basically tooling that was built for internal ops people to manage customer environments and turn it into a shrink wrap product. And so, you just think about like the usability of stuff you would build for like, internal use versus the UI for customers, and and the level of complexity you tolerate. And so just, the amount of heroic effort that it must have taken to get that product to be a real product, I think pretty huge. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, if you think about it, they built something that was ahead of its time because their business was so complex. And to my earlier point, as enterprises start to adopt virtualization, they start needing something that looks very much like what they built for their own internal management. So, is it crazy or genius? I don't know. But talk about, and I can't even imagine doing that public. Like, that would be incredibly hard as a pivot if you're, a private venture-backed company, never mind you're on the stock exchange.
Right.
Yeah.
So just for context, or go ahead, Ben.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into tech themes later, but thinking about, my job all day in working on an early stage idea and doing customer validation, you have to always find a proxy for your customer and figure out, would someone use this? Is this feature useful? Try and get inside their head and be and intuit what the customer might want.
Yeah.
But, Michelle, you said on the flip side, like, they were their own customer and they were years ahead. So they were kind of, building something that was going to be valuable a few years in the future once all the dust settled with absolute perfect information on what the necessary components of that thing were.
I mean, the perfect scenario there is they had the persona 100% right.
Right.
They were building tooling for server admins who were needing to manage environments at scale with multiple applications in there. I mean, that's the way IT began to look 5 years after they started selling that software. So you're dead right. Probably their biggest advantage was they were ahead in kind of software operation they were building, and they had the persona 1,000% dialed in because they had lived that pain. Right? All day, every day, trying to run that service offering. So, with the challenges came huge advantages that they were able to parlay into an incredible software company.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, I mean, given that you both saw this when you acquired the company from the outside, but now, you're a founder and CEO of an enterprise company. I mean, when you founded Usermind in 2013, how long did it take you, and how long did you work on building the product before you felt that it was ready to ship for customers? You knew the customer persona when you started, but just so we have context and our listeners have context, like, how hard is this task?
Oh, it's really hard. I mean, we spent 4 months interviewing. So for me, just to think about and define the persona, the use cases, the product, 4 months of interviews, probably 300 interviews,
Wow.
just to kind of get to a set of requirements. And then we went through multiple iterations. So probably it took us 2.5 years to go from an alpha or prototype, alpha, beta, to launch the software publicly and begin selling it. And look, necessity is the mother of invention. So they had to do what they were doing or fail. And I'm sure that was, that gritty determination was another, big part of their later success. But that's a pretty hard turn to make, right? To take that software and figure out how to package it up. And I would imagine a lot of their challenges were UI related, right? Where how do we now expose this tremendous tooling and IP into an application, right, that users can use who are not Opsware employees? And oddly enough, by the way, I never really talked to Ben about that part of their history. I never spent a lot of time talking about this particular moment in time.
Well, what's funny is, you'd imagine, I think if I went through this, I'd probably never want to talk about it again. But Ben went and wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank God, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like he's the first, not investor, but first CEO who essentially exposed the myth that it's all perfect all the time and kind of gave, I think, CEOs and leaders permission to talk about all of the hard things, right, that really make, or what he calls the struggle. I remember when I was going to found and he told me, your hardest challenge is going to be managing your own psychology. And he's dead right. And to me, his book gives people permission to talk about what that's really like.
Yeah, I never attribute it to that, but you're right. The last few years, it does seem like the climate of okayness to talk about these things has dramatically increased.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was a big part of it. I don't remember, and I wasn't an entrepreneur. Ben is the person who changed my life and kind of got me out of Mercury and into startups. But I think, at least in my mind, that permission from someone like him to talk about the truth, it's a great gift.
So you mentioned Mercury, just for context for our listeners. So the way you came to HP was you had been at Mercury Interactive, right? Which HP had acquired shortly before the Opsware acquisition.
Yeah, sad day.
Sad day when HP acquired Mercury?
Yeah, I loved Mercury. I mean, we weren't looking to be, all acquisitions are hard on all sides.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote-unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off, and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So what was Mercury and how did you come there and what ended up being the fit that you saw between what Opsware became and Mercury?
Yeah. Well, so I was at Mercury for almost 8 years. I was originally in the pre-sales organization. So I was, and for people who don't know, it's like technical sales, right? You're going out installing software and you're kind of the technical half of the selling motion in an enterprise software company. And I joined Mercury probably about 200 people or 250 employees, and I stayed through 3,000, through almost $1 billion in revenue. So it was an incredible experience.
I bet.
Really amazing. Yeah. And I spent half my time there in the field, and in New England, and in fact, started out really just, POCing and selling technology. And I was very blessed as the company scaled. I ended up owning more strategic accounts from a technical pre-sales perspective. And so when you're selling to GE or Fidelity, they'll say, no, we want a 3-year roadmap with Mercury. We want to talk about how to partner strategically. And so I started to work very closely with the product organization, and eventually moved out to California and took my first product role. And I was very blessed. I was the second product manager of a product called LoadRunner, which when I took over that product was already a $250 million business. It had 65% market share. Customers loved it. The product worked. And so I learned product management, or how to think about product strategy, taking over an incredibly successful business. And so I was given such freedom to put it in telesales, put it in partners, innovate on the product. And I can't imagine a better school of product management. And I rotated around. I basically managed all pieces of the testing business. And then when we got acquired by HP, my boss called me and said, hey, there's this really broken business. So this is now the time when virtualization is just exploding in the enterprise. Opsware is the market leader in data center automation, competing with BladeLogic and IBM. HP had a business.
Yep. This is kind of 5 years after the pivot. And as you said, we're in 2007 now. Virtualization is finally a thing.
It is. And, when you look at that, what that really means is that all these kind of human methods, right, the manual ways of now automating data center management end to end start, to break down, essentially. You can't scale human beings indefinitely. And so there's this incredible froth and excitement over this automation market. And HP had acquired a couple companies. They acquired a company called Radia. They had acquired a company which did, server, kind of like Opsware server automation, but they did client desktop management as well. And they'd acquired a storage product called AppIQ. But really, after spending probably $100 million, having 200 engineers on this problem, we're fifth in the market. And so, you've all said to me, my boss, the head of products at Mercury, said, hey, there's a lot of heat in the sales organization about this. Customers want a solution from HP, and we're losing a lot of deals. You're kind of my glass breaker. You want to go in there and figure it out, and it'll be a great opportunity for you, great exposure. And so that's kind of how I got in a position where I needed to think through a strategy, which ultimately led to acquiring Opsware.
Did you, I might be skipping ahead here a little bit, and then David could take us back, but this is a perfect tee up for how did you do that build versus buy? How did you do that calculation? How is that done in a company like that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I agreed to do it, took over the business, and 2 weeks later we had this, I don't even know what we call it, a quarterly business review, QBR. And I'm supposed to be updating, the head of software, Tom Hogan, and Deb and Yuval, kind of all the execs of software on our strategy. And I just took over. I don't know what our strategy is. And so I just kind of went back to first principles. And so to me, first principles are what our users want to do and what's happening in the market. And so I kind of interviewed everybody in the team, and I talked to the analysts, and I got some basic data. And the math to me was incredibly clear. So when I looked at it, we had 200 engineers on something where we were, generating 20 million in revenue. We're fifth in the market. And when I looked at the first three players, so to me, there's either emerging markets or consolidating markets. And it's important to know what market you're in. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, gosh, between Opsware, market leader, BladeLogic, second player, IBM, who'd done an acquisition, 80% of the market is in the hands of three vendors. Well, that's not an emerging market. That's a consolidating market. So that's kind of question one, is where are we at in the market evolution? And question 2 is, who are we as a company? And, there are companies who can disrupt a market that's consolidated. And that's, Mercury could have done it if we wanted to. But my point of view is that, HP at the time, and still, by the way, probably is a channel company. And what they really have is, just like IBM, is an incredible channel. And what they're great at is selling good software to companies who trust them and delivering it. And what they're not good at is building new things from scratch. And so a second part of my calculus was, Sun Tzu says, if you know yourself and you know the enemy, you'll be victorious in 1,000 battles.
We are big fans of Sun Tzu on this podcast.
I'm a huge fan. And so my second rationale was, in a consolidated market, there is no path for a company like HP to build its way to victory. So you're only left with buy or exit the market.
And you think if it was an emerging market, then HP would have had a chance at building their own, but still would be typically worse than a startup? It
would have been almost impossible for that to happen. But yes, I mean, in theory, we could have had a chance. And you probably would have taken a different strategy in that context, right? But so that, I actually was given a very simple problem. There was nothing really complex about answering that question. There's more to it, but that's essentially the math. And so, even more, if you looked at it in the context of the whole portfolio, why would you invest so much engineering for so little return? Because, the other part about software, which we all understand in valuation, is that the only players that make any money are the number 1 or number 2 player in the market. So even if there was a path for HP to become from 5 to 4 or take out IBM and 5 to 3, profitability goes to the winner. And so you lose money indefinitely on a software business unless you become the dominant player, and then you make insane profit. And to me, if there's no path to number 1 or number 2 for you based on who you are, that's really when you need to look at a buy solution. And so that was really, I think I presented 5 slides. It was very concrete. I also, by the way, spent a bunch of time interviewing salespeople and trying to understand how important this was. Meaning, how often was it coming up in deals? What was the channel relevance, right? Because the other piece of it is, if we did a deal, can we monetize? Are we talking to the people who'd buy it? Do we feel like we could have gotten that money that went to Opsware or IBM? And that was maybe the last piece of the calculus, was the channel fit was very high. So HP at the time had many brands, OpenView being one of the most famous ones, that we were selling to the operations teams. So we had a very experienced channel selling to the same buyer that would be buying Opsware or buying BladeLogic. And when you really step back and look at that math, it's pretty obvious that it has to be an M&A scenario, or you should shut the business down.
Right. But
so that was phase 1.
But you probably did enough calculus on what does this market look like in 5 or 10 years, where it was like, we can't afford to not play in this market.
Yeah, that's all the obvious math. I guess that was implied in my head. I think probably if that didn't make sense, HP wouldn't have already been in the space.
Right.
So maybe that's why I didn't reference it.
Right.
I think it was pretty.
The future of the data center, right? Virtualization is now. I don't know that there's any data center probably in the world that doesn't at least have some degree of virtualization now.
Oh yeah. And by the way, now it's become containerization. So if you had won this battle, in theory, you have a very strategic control point. So to me, that goes to now you're in the second question, which is, okay, if it's either go buy the winner or shut your business down, you've asked the next question, which is, is this strategic land? Do we have to own this land? Is it a strategic control point to owning the future disruption of the enterprise, or is it strategic to my buyer, to the point where if I don't have this, I undermine other businesses? And you've kind of,
and the buyer being the end customer here that HP was selling to,
IT operations person, yeah. And so you guys have already made the argument. It's pretty clear that our actual Uber theory at the time was that for IT operations folks, automation and monitoring would ultimately converge. And so the winning vendor for IT operations wasn't just the winning vendor who had HP OpenView, but it was the one who had the best automation and the best monitoring. And when you think about it at that level, by the way, then your competitors are very few people. You're competing with HP and with BMC and CA. And so the number of people who could actually, if that's really the winning strategy in IT operations, how many people are positioned well to compete with us? And so we really thought that if we did this deal, it was us and BMC competing to dominate IT operations. In light of that, you can see why the buy decision became very clear. that we felt it was strategic land, not just because of the immediate opportunity around, virtualization and kind of the core automation problem, but our hypothesis that it would become a converged solution, and that would actually strengthen our already dominant OpenView business, right? And that it would be a 1 + 1 is 3 in the broader IT operations business. So you can see what drove, from our point of view, we called it a coveted asset. We felt that Opsware would be, not just bringing the Opsware business, but it would be affecting a much larger existing business within HP.
Yeah. So you do end up buying it in July 2007 for $1.6 billion. And after the pivot 5 years earlier, in the public markets, the public market pivot, what then became Opsware was trading for $28 million of market cap, which was $40 million less than the amount of cash that they had in the bank. So they had $60 million or $70 million of cash in the bank, and they're trading for $28 million. So 5 years later, incredible turnaround, and achieve an exit that's 50 times that.
Wow.
What was it like after you bought them, though? I mean, from an integration process and a culture, I mean, this was a team that had been through the fire twice, and now they're part of HP.
Absolutely. I want to know that. And Michelle, the one thing I've really been with holding back from asking is, okay, so you make this presentation and it's 5 slides and you make the decision, what logistically happens after that? You shoot an email to Ben at Opsware? How does that happen?
Yeah. So there's actually 2 interesting things that happens, if you don't mind, before we get to the integration. So the process, obviously the executives have to kind of come to some consensus that they agree to that. And there was, quite a lot of discussion that I wasn't part of, but where, the head of software talked to his head of sales. And so kind of validating, hey, this is important. Hey, we're seeing them in all the deals. So that, the executives needed to go and both think about it as well as kind of validate the data I put forward to them about how important this was going to be. So, it took some time for us to get kind of organizational alignment on the state of the market and, how key this could be. And honestly, that was not that controversial. I think, it was really clear that we needed something, that customers wanted us to have a product. The interesting discussion was then, who do you buy? So kind of before you get to the buying Opsware, there was an alternate, vendor. And so
BladeLogic, right?
BladeLogic, right? Yeah. So
which BMC did buy.
Right? So, the interesting thing about that is, you don't email. So what happened is someone from Corp Dev was assigned to us, right? So Sandeep Johri at the time was running corporate development, and he kind of took ownership of the project on the Corp Dev side. And I wasn't, actually that involved in that, not in that piece of it, but I wasn't on all the email chains where they're emailing Ben. I was in most of the meetings. I did all the technical due diligence. So you kind of start these threads, and we ran our threads in parallel. So we were talking to both Opsware and BladeLogic, and that involved financial due diligence, customer reviews, technical diligence. It was pretty fascinating. In fact, once we had decided our vendor, I was actually on site. We were on site during their sales kickoff, which was a little known fact. And I, in fact, couldn't leave the room. So everybody else was allowed to leave. But there were so many Mercury people at Opsware that people were worried that if I left, everyone would know who I was. So there was quite a lot of drama to that, but look, the net of, how do you, why HP versus, or why Opsware versus BladeLogic, to me, it boiled down to what do you need to buy and how many acquisitions can we execute? So there's kind of a little known wrinkle here, which is while they started as a server automation company, that was the Loudcloud heritage. Ben's vision was to automate the entire data center. So they did acquisitions to acquire a runbook automation technology from a company called iConclude that was based in Seattle, actually. And they bought a network automation company. I actually believe that one was based in Seattle as well. So they made a couple acquisitions to extend their product line from server automation to what they call data center automation. And our theory was actually slightly bigger than that, as we felt that what customers wanted to do was deploy services end to end. And so the winning vendor would be executing a product strategy to bring desktop, server, network, storage, all of the automation elements into a suite to automate application deployment so that, servers on some level are just one tiny piece of an end-to-end IT service. So that was the strategy we were executing. And when you look at that, we had a client product already at HP, and we had a storage product from these acquisitions we had. And so really what, there was a lot of differences from a market share perspective. Clearly, Opsware was ahead of BladeLogic, and that's very attractive. You kind of de facto always want to buy the market leader.
Yep.
However, at the time, BladeLogic had a better product than Opsware. So that is the downside of this kind of Loudcloud, and I would say better product in the sense of usability. So where they lost deals, it was on usability. Where they won deals, it was on enterprise scale. So there were product implications to this kind of pivot that they did.
And this is, to preview tech themes a little bit, I mean, this is something that for listeners that aren't as familiar with enterprise technology, it's just such a hard thing initially to get your mind around. Steve Jobs talked about this, that in the enterprise, it's not always the best product that wins. Opsware was the market leader, but as you're saying, they didn't have the best product. They had the best sales motion.
Yeah. Well, and at least in server automation. So, their strategy was to basically move to the suite motion. So they had the best suite. BladeLogic did not have other products. They had partnerships to solve that problem. So, if Opsware could move the buying criteria to being data center automation, they won. Because it isn't just head-to-head product to product. So, our assessment was, number one, we wanted to buy the market leader, and that having the, first mover in our channel, best current position in what we thought was one of the best channels in the world is the best combination. But the second piece of math for us was that if we had gone after BladeLogic, we would have had to do 3 additional acquisitions. And we felt that the risk, even though if it would have been cheaper, we thought that actually the likelihood of our ability to successfully acquire 4 companies was significantly less than 1. And if you look at big companies buying, small companies, in many cases, the medium-sized ones do the best. They're big enough that they can be put in the channel and it works. And in many cases, these little technology tuck-ins, a $10 million acquisition is harder to make work than a $1 billion acquisition because there's not critical mass of people and ideas to teach the rest of the company how to sell.
Oh, wow.
So the 2 pieces for us on Opsware were, or I guess 3, strategic alignment. They had the full suite. They were the market leader. And even if they had some product deficiencies, we felt that we were much more likely to be able to execute that successfully than BladeLogic plus 3 others. And so that's kind of the math that led to the end of us saying, our preference, our top partner, our top target would be Opsware versus BladeLogic. And, we continued talking to BladeLogic to the end. So if we had lost Opsware to BMC or to whomever, we would have had a fallback plan. But we had a clear preference and paid a premium for it, frankly.
Wow. So now I want to jump to the culture and the people piece now. I mean, that all makes, that is bulletproof logic there. But, you read Hard Thing About Hard Things, or you listen to Ben, or you look at Andreessen Horowitz, and the first thing that comes to mind is not, HP. What was it like, integrating this team?
Well, interesting. So, one, if you've read the book, Ben has a management technique called Freaky Friday. So I thought, hey, I'm going to run the integration and they're just going to give me some special projects and send me off in the sunset. I didn't have a product. I didn't expect to have a product ownership at that point. So Ben actually swapped me and his head of product at the time, Eric Vishria. So Eric took over ITSM. Eric is now at Benchmark Capital as a VC, Benchmark, and founded his own company kind of in between his stint at HP and that and joining Benchmark. But Eric joined the ITSM team and took it over, and Frank Chen, who was the product management half of that partnership,
and is now at Andreessen
Horowitz, moved into engineering to help under Jason Rosenthal, who was the head of engineering there at the time. And so Ben gave me product, and that was an incredible. So he calls it Freaky Friday, where he swaps executives.
Like the Jamie Lee Curtis movie.
Yeah, that's one of his management techniques that he wrote about, and I think and I worked directly for him, so that was pretty amazing as an opportunity and experience. I think a part of why it worked is that I was at HP, so I was a Mercury person, where the DNA is much closer to Opsware. Many, by the way, like that silly sales kickoff story. There were many Mercury people at HP. Mercury was a very Israeli company, very, very aggressive, very direct. We were very customer focused, and winning was incredibly important. So a lot of external values that I think mapped really closely to the Opsware teams. So I think one piece of it was, he put someone in charge of the integration who had the same cultural values as his own team. And I think that made things easier. But for sure, there's culture friction. I mean, as an example, we're going through the formal integration process, and I remember being on the phone with the IT organization, and the IT organization is insisting that we have to shut down all these non-approved apps that Opsware has. And one of the non-approved apps, I'll give you two that are just outrageous. One of them happened to be the license key generator for all of the Opsware software. And we had to shut it off at the time of acquisition, according to IT. And I'm like, someone help me understand why we would, spend $1.6 billion and then basically be unable to sell and turn on any of the software. Or the other one was
there was no grace period of we should spin up something else
day
to
one.
make it so.
So you're in this 6 month, whatever it was, 4 month. I don't even remember. It was kind of like dog years. You're in this integration, which is super intense, but you have this deadline. And, IT had very strict objectives. I mean, Mark Hurd was running HP at the time. So that was Mark Hurd's HP. Second, they had a source control standard within the company. And of course, they were like, well, you have to migrate all the source control and source code into this new, and this
is pre-GitHub.
Yeah. And as in that time, that was just almost impossible. So there was a lot of these kind of weird operational hurdles that I wouldn't have anticipated. That's kind of a whole class of problem that you have to deal with. Again, I feel like I was very lucky because, I was kind of a liaison between, I probably absorbed a lot of that weird cultural friction for those guys in that sense, at least during the integration. And actually at the time, Scott Cooper was my partner on the Opsware side. So he's now the, I guess, COO, running all the operating arm of Andreessen Horowitz. But he was a great partner on the Opsware side. So I found for me working with them was very easy, and a lot of my job was basically trying to prevent the big mechanism of HP from, making unnatural things happen. But once we had them integrated, I think then there was a lot more interesting. So you kind of get this middle period where you're dealing with all the organizational administrivia. That's frustrating. I think one thing we did well in that period was we took market share. So we kind of really sold the heck out of Opsware in that period and gained a pretty good advantage over BladeLogic because at the time, BMC hadn't yet announced their deal with Blade. And then, as we formally integrated them, we had all of the challenges you can imagine. So the software, the sales organization, you start to break up the teams, right? So instead of being Opsware now, engineering's part of Ben's organization. So Ben took over products and engineering for HP software. And so, on some level, that's a little safe. The sales organization got put under some of the sales leaders as overlays. And to be honest, that's an area where if I look back, gosh, I wish we had done a better job. So, the good news is we had these experts, these black belts, and Opsware was global. So we immediately got traction globally. But overlays are a hard thing to make work. And I feel like,
And you say overlays as in there's HP management on top of each of the
sorry, not being clear. Sales overlays. So generally speaking, when you put a new product that's hard to sell, there's a lot of IP in how to sell it. And so you take these sales organization of Opsware and who used to just sell Opsware, and now they're basically what we call overlays. They work with the HP people because the HP people already own all those accounts and they sell this huge portfolio of software, but they don't know Opsware. So you have this kind of digestion period where you're having you're trying to disseminate the expertise of the acquired company into your sales organization, and eventually you want the motion to be that it's fully absorbed and everybody's fully trained and you can sell. But that's the biggest question is how do you train and enable that sales organization to be even half as effective as an Opsware person was in objections and challenges and competitive landscape and so forth. And so that presents just its whole own set of challenges. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I think this is a big thing for listeners to understand. When it's easy to look at this from the outside and say, okay, like enterprise is about sales channels and sales motions. Like, I sort of get what that means, but like this is it in practice. I mean, the Opsware sales team was, sort of a finely tuned machine to sell data center, automation and management. But the HP sales team is selling all sorts of things, a whole portfolio of everything you could imagine to CIOs at companies. And so now Opsware is going to be just a small piece of that portfolio. And so you need the HP sales team to digest that and understand how to sell Opsware best. But it's not just about selling Opsware, it's about selling everything.
Yeah. So you have a huge enablement challenge. And that, that was, I loved that. I ran the product management and product marketing organization for the combined business, what we ended up calling BSA. So it was business service automation. We kind of did away with the DCA term. But it was, a phenomenal challenge. I mean, we did so much training. I actually flew in the year after that acquisition. I think I flew 350,000 miles worldwide.
Wow.
Visiting customers, doing deals, training reps, it was pretty phenomenal. And we saw huge growth. It's been a long time for me. It's been a decade, but, I don't remember. I think by the time I left, we'd seen, 350% growth in the business. So from that perspective, talk about a huge, it's at least a huge early down payment of success on your vision of kind of the value of that technology.
Yeah.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you.
We've got a format to this show that at some point we'll move here into categorization. But I'm curious, looking back on it all, where the state of data centers are today, and with the rise of cloud services and the major players being Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or you can make arguments about that, but you don't often hear HP thrown around in there. And what do you think happened in the last decade from the world of data center automation into business center automation, business service automation into the world that we have today? And why isn't HP one of those big four?
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, I look at the natural successors of Opsware, and I think of companies like Puppet and Chef. And by the way, how fascinating, one's local in Seattle here, but they're both going to be public companies. I don't remember if Puppet already filed, but, it's pretty clear that those companies are on their way.
Yep.
So, the inheritors of the problem and the market opportunity are those companies. And in fact, it'll be very interesting to see, whether Dockerization brings a new generation, a third generation, or whether Dockerization just accelerates Chef and Puppet. They're able to capitalize on that motion. But Why not HP? Look, it's very hard for big companies to innovate. And here's the reason why. Innovation, number one, is a people thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have a really high quality of thought. And that's all people. And at least at the time I was at HP, it was interesting. It was a very, Herd had a very manufacturing mindset, and manufacturing companies look at people as very interchangeable. Software companies have this idea of the 10Xer, where, the 10X developer can do things that no one else can do, and the 10X product person can see things no one else can see. And it's really true that there isn't a scalableness to the way software works inherently. Like you can't replace Steve Jobs with 100 other people and get the same work that Steve Jobs did, right? It just doesn't work that way. So, when you look at kind of our software organization or a software business, one, you need to retain those top people. And I think big organizations have just an incredibly hard time doing it because of a culture mismatch. My level of patience for the HP culture was very low. And by the way, my culture fit with them was very low. I swear too much for HP, for example. But so you get that like weird DNA mismatch. So that's kind of one big challenge. I think the other big challenge is that institutionally, you need courage. So I actually think Mercury is an example. There are big software companies that can innovate and can, not have a disruption, destroy their business, but take advantage of it. Maybe Chef and Puppet will, as an example. But, Mercury went from, 0 to 3,000 people, 0 to 1 billion. So you can do it. And I think the second thing required besides, in these 10Xers in your key roles in product and engineering and sales is you need the courage to basically bet before the data is obvious. So, Opsware is an unusual situation where the product, by the way, their vision was, 10 years ahead of its time, really. So timing might have been a problem for them. But the vision's dead on, and the product was close enough that they could go monetize it. And they ended up, their timing was right on virtualization. So talk about the confluence of events. I think when you're in a big company, the second challenge that's really hard is that disruptions often sneak up on you. So if you're HP and you own Opsware and you've won, do you really have anyone in the company who can feel that Docker's coming and know that existentially Docker is a threat to your control, or that, whatever it was, I don't know. I wasn't close enough to the business around the Chef and Puppet timeframe. I actually probably was DevOps, right? So the fact that like development and ops were converging represents an existential threat to your business. So the second challenge a big company has is not only do you have the right person, but that person would see that threat coming and be able to mobilize the leaders to move. And so, how do you, in a big company, you need the geniuses, you need them to see far, like with almost no data, and you need leadership who will bet based on that. And that's, to be honest, most executives in big companies are used to waiting until the entire PowerPoint deck is 50 slides and all the data is there and the decision's safe. And you have Microsoft, not under Satya, but maybe that's Ballmer's Microsoft, and you miss the entire market. And so I think that's probably why it's not HP and it is Puppet, because it's much more than the software is the outcome of the people and the process the leadership used, right? And that once that falls apart, it's almost impossible to replicate.
Oh man, I'm just
my 2 cents
hitting here. Yeah. This is going to fit in so perfectly with my tech theme. Should we move along to get there? I definitely want to come back and talk about what it's like now having been on your board at Usermind, but let's finish out Opsware first. So acquisition category, for me, this seems pretty clear. It's a product that you bought to put into the HP sales channel. So to me, this is a product acquisition.
Yeah, and I've been torn between product and business line, and we sort of define business line as self-sustaining, independently functioning product that comes with sales and vision that just may not be independently broken out to shareholders as a separate line item, but basically functions as its own independent business. It seems like after hearing you talk and after David asserting product, I'm closer to product now, and I'm thinking there's much tighter integration, much more quickly, and it was not really an independent business. But would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, not really. Ben took over the whole HP software business. He became the head under Tom Hogan of product and engineering. And we definitely had the Opsware organization separate for a short period of time, but no, the integration was incredibly rapid. And the purpose of that was to inject the DNA into the broader organization.
Yep.
So, there was a larger transformation happening within HP Software at the time, right? The acquisition of Mercury was, I think, the first, and then Opsware, and they did others after I left. Autonomy not being a great example, but there was a bunch, and there was an Uber strategy, an overarching strategy there that they were trying to transform the culture and transform the software organization. So the integration strategy was very much driven by this overarching vision that they had about kind of bringing in a bunch of fresh DNA. So no, it was not run as a standalone business, except for the period during the integration when that's required.
Cool. Moving to, or David, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, then we have what would have happened otherwise. I think we probably covered that pretty well with the discussion of BMC and Blade Logic.
Yeah, I have one thing to sort of posit on that, and Michel, if you guys have made the decision that we're not going to buy, we're not going to build, we're just going to be done in this market, would HP be in a significantly different position today?
Well, I've been gone so long; it's a very, very hard question to answer. Look, I guess if I had been there and the answer was we didn't want to do Opsware or Blade, then I think I would have proposed that we take all the engineers. I would shut down the DCA business, and I would have proposed essentially shooting for the next product and taking that engineering team and building a converged automation and monitoring product with every engineer from the team, and basically give up the land for the current iteration and wait for the next disruption and bet that we'd be on time. I don't know if that would have happened or if it would have been successful, but I believe I wouldn't have gone down without a fight. I would have fought for what I thought was the right thing for the company.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting tech theme where we've seen this multiple times with multiple companies, but when you miss one hill, it really gives you an opportunity to see the world from a different perspective and be better at taking the next hill and be better at targeting exactly what customers want. And there's a little bit of desperation there. I mean, Apple and the iPhone. There's tons of examples of
mother of invention.
Yep. We missed this war or we missed the battle, but hopefully we hit the next one.
Yeah, I mean, Loudcloud into Opsware.
Yep.
Should we jump into tech themes?
Yeah.
Ben, you want to kick it off?
That was the main one that I wanted to point out. So why don't you go for it?
Okay. Well, I just loved. I was smiling, grinning ear to ear, Michel, when you were talking about timing and management, and this is for me what this story just illustrates so well is like the absolutely critical role of timing in technology, both consumer and enterprise. I mean, Loudcloud was 100% the right product. It was AWS before AWS, and AWS is one of the probably top 3 biggest and most important products in technology today. But the timing was wrong. And I think about, I heard, I can't remember where I heard this, but I think Sequoia, the venture capital firm, did a study, a number of years ago about what is sort of the most important factor for their investment partners in how the quality of their decision making and the quality of their investments. And they concluded that it was timing. It was getting the timing right in a market. But what I think you said so that was what I had down as my theme for this episode. But I think what you said, there's more to it than that. And that's that the role of talent in technology, both from a product and a management standpoint, is managing that timing. Like, it would have been so easy at Loudcloud to say like, well, we got the timing wrong, we're done. But what Ben and Marc were able to do was say, we got the timing wrong, but we're going to get the timing right on this other piece of it, and we're going to pivot into that. And I think that's what, like, talking about 10x folks in tech, that's like what it's having, that vision and being able to manage timing in a market. That's really, what it comes down to, I think, both in consumer and enterprise.
I mean, yeah, look, I think timing is just, it's the one law you just don't control. I think it's interesting. I think Marc Andreessen talks about it, good market, bad team, they do all right. Terrible market, great team, you're kind of screwed. And so like what trumps what? You've got kind of what is the idea good enough? How big is the market? Timing, and then people. And so I always say like, what's the why? What's the idea? What problem are you solving? Why? The second question is why now? Why is it inevitable now that this idea should matter or be more relevant or actually be a business? And the third part is where team is in, is like, what's the likelihood you have to execute into that? And then it's interesting, I think on the people front, it's, if you go into Ben Horowitz's office within Andreessen, he has people on the wall, pictures of people, and it's scientists on one wall and boxers on the other. And we're both big boxing fans. But he would summarize it this way, which is, he says, entrepreneurship is the intersection of intellect and courage. And so I think it's not just seeing that the thing is happening; it's having the courage to fight for the deal. In the case of an acquisition, or fight for the strategy, or fight for like your life in the company if you're failing. And I think that can't be underestimated, right? Mm-hmm. Is the level of grit and kind of, I call it a little bit of irrationality that's required in that human capital to be successful.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
I love that phrase.
It was that, right, that took a negative equity value public company at the time of the pivot to a $1.6 billion acquisition, right?
Yeah, I think Ben is a great man. There's no question about that, and one of the most genuinely humble and nice people I've ever met in my life, which just is doubly incredible.
That's awesome. All right, should we grade this?
Yeah. So, Michelle, we were talking before the show, and you said, yes, indeed, I will help grade. So I'm curious, looking back on this and sort of taking yourself out of the equation, how'd it go?
I would probably give it a B. I think we were able to get, a huge revenue boost. We essentially accelerated the market dominance of Opsware. I think the reason I wouldn't give it an A is I don't think we saw the strategic long-term vision come to fruition the way it certainly could have. And I think the biggest difference is people. You lose Ben, you lose me, you lose Mark Cranny. Those are the people who would have made that next wave of value creation happen. So that's my perspective. Although I guess maybe it's an A+ in the sense that if we hadn't acquired Opsware, Marc and Ben wouldn't have founded Andreessen Horowitz, and
David wouldn't have founded Usermind.
And I think they've disrupted the valley. So maybe it's an A from that point of view.
David's pulled that card before, where the actual financial outcome for the company was something, but the goodness for the world was something else.
Yeah.
I think David, yours,
and maybe I meant B from HP's perspective.
Yeah, and that is how we grade on the show typically, is how good of a decision was it for the acquirer to make the decision.
Great.
And David, I think the time when you pulled that was PayPal Mafia.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, I think it's completely relevant here again. I mean, there is an Opsware mafia. You talked about Eric at Benchmark and, practically the whole Andreessen Horowitz team, or at least the initial team, you and
we're sitting here in the beautiful Usermind office looking out over the skyline of Seattle. So definitely
well,
a mafia.
and locally in Seattle, obviously Aptio was their first investment. So that's where I was their head of product, and that company has since IPO'd. And, Sunny Gupta, that CEO, Ben had acquired his last company, I Conclude. So, I mean, there's many more, right? Their initial investment in Okta and, now Signal FX, where that's one of the CTOs of Opsware is now the co-founder there. And Karthik Rao, Eric Vishria's roommate, is the CEO. And it goes on and on and on.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Wow.
It's totally crazy. Well, I can't argue with those grades.
Yeah, I mean, I have I have far less perfect information. So B sounds great to me.
Let's but before we jump into carve-outs, I'm sort of dying to talk about, given all that, like, what's it like now on the other side of the world where, Ben's at Andreessen Horowitz and he's on your board?
Well, number one, I mean, Ben's an incredible board member. So, taking away Usermind and just my personal journey, he's phenomenal. I think their whole philosophy. So now, obviously at Aptio, I was, in the leadership team, and I was part of the board meetings and would present to the board. And so I got to see that board. And now I've got my own board. But, it's really striking to me, this thesis that they have, even more broadly than Ben, that operators, former CEOs make better board members. And for me, I don't know if that's true broadly because I'm working with Ben, but I feel that Ben's experience as a CEO helps me, every day, every week, every month, every board meeting. He's been just incredibly, just been invaluable in my development as a CEO and helping me kind of think about how to grow the company on every level. And, you think about board members as being really valuable in the context of a board meeting, reviewing financials and helping you think about when to scale what function and when do you add what executive and, kind of how are you doing from a customer traction point of view. And he's phenomenal there. But, Ben to me is as or more valuable to a CEO in your one-on-ones where I might be talking with him about a management challenge, or how do you run a staff meeting as you grow the company, or, how do you think about different inflection points in your own leadership style and the way the business is changing, and where do you spend your time, and think about hiring your first exec, how do you do that, and what are you looking for? There's so many more ways that a board member adds value to a CEO's both decision-making and growth as a CEO than the board meetings. And I found him to be, and part of it is our relationship, I'm sure, because I trust him and he knows me very well. But he's just an incredible sounding board with such a wealth of talent. I remember asking him, as an example, to share advice. I asked him when I was hiring my first executive, my first non-co-founder executive in the company, kind of like, what's the central thing I'm looking for? And I'll just generalize it because I don't need to talk about the specific role. And his answer was, an executive is someone who gives you leverage. I'm like, okay, that is the ultimate truism. So if you're hiring as a CEO, a person, one of the things is they probably know more about their function than you, which means that it's very hard to interview them and know you're selecting the right person. But on the flip side, it also means that if that person joins and doesn't give you instant leverage, you've hired the wrong person.
Yep.
And talk about, I've never in my entire life heard anyone in a single word
distill it so
succinctly articulate how to evaluate a hire and how to both before hiring them and as they've joined the company. And that's just a simple example of one question I've asked him and the kind of response that I get. So I don't know if that's the type of information you're looking for, but I feel blessed every day.
Hey, I learned something today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just, this is something I've been reflecting on a lot recently, as being in venture myself, and, Ben and I have been doing this together too. Really, this is making the case for, as a venture investor, there's this concept of, being a company builder and contributing to the building of the company. You called it adding value, Michelle, but, and I really think if you're not doing things like that, then what are you? You're a stock picker, right? And does that even make sense in startups? You can't pick stocks in startups. And if you want to, earn returns for your investors and yourself, the only thing that makes sense really is to do, approach this craft like Ben does, and like Eric does at Benchmark, and like many good VCs do, which is there has to be, and for you, I would imagine that provides a hugely compelling value why you would want them on your board.
Oh yeah, there's so many kind of elements to how you think about your board composition, and I think what you're looking for, but. If you can get a person who is, that level of genius, right, who can contribute in such a fundamental way to value building, let's not underestimate when, kind of the value of the brand as well. So not just Ben Horowitz, but Andreessen Horowitz. I think, I remember in the early days of the company, engineers would say, I'd be like, why did you take the meeting with us? And they'd say, well, you're an Andreessen Horowitz company. So, the brand is also something that helps you build the company and separates you from other startups that, helps you kind of be competitive in this war for talent, right, which is happening all around us in Seattle. And then, I think just the particular expertise that board member brings is something extremely unique. So, I did not know Ben was going to leave and start a venture capital firm when he left HP, but it's shaped my life. I mean, he's the person who said to me, "You need to go be in a startup." He's why I went to Aptio and joined. And in fact, at the time, he said, "You should just found." But I had never worked in a startup, so I wanted to go work for a serial CEO and learn something. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I did. I mean, I think it's the right choice for me. I knew the right choice for me. But, he fundamentally shaped my life trajectory. So if I shaped his by kind of changing his trajectory by the acquisition, he's profoundly changed mine. I mean, I wouldn't have known I'd be a CEO. I wouldn't have thought I would end up in startups. I love product. I'm certainly a product person, but I didn't wake up at 23 thinking that's what I was going to do. So,
well,
That's a great perspective.
Great note to wrap this one up on. We do have our last final segment of carve outs, and actually this is a really good tee up for mine for the week. Mine is Jimmy Iovine, the record industry executive and co-founder of Beats with Dr. Dre, who he produced as a music producer, was on the Bill Simmons podcast on The Ringer last week, and it's wonderful. And it's the music industry and the record industry, and lots of great stories there from all the artists from all genres that Jimmy worked with. But he talks about kind of just that, what you were talking about, Michelle, and like the sort of courage to go and do his own thing and blaze his own path in the business. And he talks about this concept of like having fear, and like fear can be sort of paralyzing. And for a long time he was paralyzed until he found like this thing, and that was music and the music industry, that like the fear kind of motivated him. The fear was like, I fear that I'm going to miss out if I don't go. If I don't go and I, capture this opportunity. He used the analogy of like, when you're playing baseball and like either, you're in the outfield and you could think like, don't hit the ball to me, you could be fearful of it. Or you could say like, hit the ball to me because I'm fearful, like, I'm going to make the play. And
right.
if it doesn't come to me, I'm not going to make the play.
Right. It's like an opportunity to succeed rather than an opportunity to fail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great. Highly recommend.
Huh. Man, I love the Ringer podcast. If you're listening to this show and you're thinking, I've listened to a lot of shows and, I've listened to a lot of episodes of Acquired. If there's any that was particularly good where I was like pumped up and like you felt like I was on my A game, it's because I listened to Bill Simmons before and I got Bill Simmons' voice in my head and I was ready to go. So, that's your carve out. You can take that one, but I also recommend you listen to the Ringer podcast. Mine is a software package called StarStax. And I've been it would be overselling to say I've been an amateur photographer. I've enjoyed taking pictures for a long time, and especially I do these big backpacking trips every summer with my dad. And this time I decided to carry the extra weight and bring about a 2.5 pound tripod out with me and try and do some star photos. And so this is super hard. And I was bad at it 4 out of the 5 nights with either crazy blurry photos or like, it was cold and the lens fogged or the clouds rolled in. But there's one night where I kind of nailed it. And so the process is wild. You like leave the camera out on a tripod, you go to bed, you set an alarm, you wake up in the middle of the night, like 3-4 hours later, and you go collect it and you cross your fingers and hope for the best when you import it all later. And StarStax is this incredibly cool piece of software on your computer that will take hundreds of long exposure photos that are taken over several hours and overlay them all on top of each other kind of automagically. So you don't have to do it all manually in Photoshop and really produce some cool star trails. So if anybody's interested, we can link to that from the show notes. And I highly recommend StarStax. That's all we've got. Michelle, thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you? Are you on the socials?
Yeah, so Michel Feaster at Twitter. We're at Usermind Inc. Both easy ways to meet my acquaintance. We're also on Facebook, obviously, as Usermind, and I'm Michel Feaster pretty much everywhere socially. Or Michelle at Usermind. If people are out there and you're an early founder and you're terrified, I don't take every meeting because I'm super busy, but I feel like I've only gotten where I've gotten because so many people have helped me. So, easy to get me. And, if I could make time to help folks, I definitely will.
Awesome.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, Statsig.
Yes, longtime acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on Statsig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where Statsig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
Listeners,
Thank you, Michelle.
Listeners, check out the Slack, acquired.fm, and we would love a review on iTunes. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
We'll see you next time.